For the first part of our final projects, we're going to be illustrating an action word. Now, some of these samples that I have are not necessarily action words per se, but you'll get the idea, like our first one here. So what I mean by that is what I would like you to do is select an action word, and you'll see some in my samples here, like wave and orbit, etc. And we're going to illustrate it. Some of these are really simple, but clean and effective. Some of these are a little bit more complex, and we're going to use some of the tools that we've learned all semester to do this. So this one I thought was just a really cool use of negative space, not necessarily an action word, but you have the spelled out number 4, and then you have the actual 4 hiding in that negative space there. Super clean, super simple, really effective. Moving on to candle. Again, I know not necessarily an action word, but I thought that was pretty awesome. So we have the word spelled out, candle, and then in the negative space between the L and the D here, you have the candle, obviously. Works super, super well with the kerning, going back to, I believe, our second assignment. The kerning overall works really well. The negative space fits really well within that kerning overall. Again, using some of the tools that we've been working with all semester. Again, not an action word, but ghost. Again, this negative space here works really, really well. Using some of the tools like the Pathfinder to create shapes, and then to cut out some of the shapes with the O and the S here. Negative space is working super, super effectively there. So we get into some more action words here. Technically, wave. So we have clearly, obviously, the W going into the A here, negative space with the A, and the wave creating that negative space within the A. Works really, really well. Again, kerning on point. Our plug here, super duper. I mean, this is more of a noun, I guess, but plug can also be an action because you plug something in. But again, really great font choice. Really great font choice. Really, really simple, effective use of elements here. Very even, a very even balance of positive, negative space between the text and the background here. I really, really enjoyed this one actually. For our orbit, again, super clean, super effective. Yours don't necessarily have to be this clean. I just kind of lean towards this particular type of like clean design. It's just sort of the aesthetic that I gravitate towards. But again, we have the action of the orbit. It also, is very reflective of the planet, etc., etc. Again, great font choice. Reads really well. The action reads perfectly. Here we go with on. Technically an action word, but you get the idea. I like the use of the digital power button that we're kind of all used to in this day and age. A really good use of font choice here. Again with the power button being on. Some of these are a little more self-explanatory than others. Drone. Again, this is not necessarily an action word, but I thought it was a really, really clean, cool use of positive, negative space. Again, the text is super, super effective. I like the idea of having this also. Think about when you're presenting these. The presentation on the artboard itself. This one is presented a little bit higher up on the artboard because it's a drone, so it flies, so that kind of thing. Giving it more negative space at the bottom and the top to sort of give this more higher up floating look. Swing. Again, a really, really good use of positive, negative space. You have the elements going up towards the edge of the frame. Again, consider these as like a finished final piece of art, essentially, and presenting them in that manner. So think of how you're presenting these. Don't just slap them on your artboard. Use the artboard or use your working space as part of your presentation as well. So this is a great use of that presentation. Bringing in some other elements. Obviously you can bring in other elements. You can create elements. So in this case, they created this little silhouette to create that W for the swing, which is really cool. And then we get into some more action words here. Run. Some of these are mock-ups, which is kind of interesting, but these mock-ups, I grabbed some of these from Instagram. But you can see, like, run. This is a very simple, clean, effective use of movement, creating these cuts and action lines, and then even the exclamation point to give it more sort of power, emphasis. Again, the font choice is really, really well done. The kerning, the tight kerning in this case, works really well with the use of the action lines. Again, not necessarily an action word, but long, so you get this kind of cool stretching and also arced effect. So keep in mind all the effects and all the things that we've been using so far in Illustrator. If you also are aware or want to explore other effects, please go for it. Do so. We're not just limited to what we learned this semester. Like you can really explore Illustrator and some of the 3D effects that are available to you. Some of the warp tools and warp effects that are available to us. And then lastly, this one was, I thought, really, really well done. We obviously get the idea of what the word is based on, I feel, more the illustration rather than the word. If we cover up I can't really scroll and do it, but if we cover up, the bottom, the top of the word is a tiny bit hard to read with the tight kerning and the font choice, but I think it works really, really well. Again, with this illustration, you have a sort of, it's a heavier font, but you have the serif font. It's a little bit more elegant, so it potentially looks a little bit more fragile. But with the actual, like, illustration of the action being broken, really speaks to the nature of the action word, the shattering going on here. I think it's really, really well done. So this is what I mean when we're going to be illustrating an action word. And then I have some links that I'll include as well when we talk about using other effects and other things that we might not have covered. This one is, I'm not going to play it, but is how to create a sort of stepped look. I'm not going to go through it entirely, and obviously you're not going to be copying these. You're going to be thinking of your own original designs. But so like a step or step up. So basically, they take the typeset, kind of scroll through. They typeset, create outlines, and then create a grid, break it apart, throw some warping effects on it, and some shading. And then you see this, you get this sort of natural. So here's where they're throwing the two different effects. And then you just kind of line them up and then work with the shading, and then there you have your steps. And again, I'll include these in our project description as well. This is going through some of the warp tools in Illustrator to create some of these, like this fluid effect that we have going on once it actually, there we go. So once it actually goes into, my computer's starting to freak out, of course, which is not fun. But you can see in the preview here we have a good warp, a nice warp effect, and this is using the mesh tool, which we haven't necessarily covered, but please feel free to explore. That's why I'm including these some of these tutorials. There's a melting effect in this one. This guy's actually kind of a cool follow. He's totally worth checking out and worth following. But he creates this very interesting ice melting effect. And then here in this frozen preview, what he's doing is he's using your basic shape tool and your Pathfinder to create the sort of dripping blobs on the word ice. As you can see, as I scroll through here, he's creating, just using shape builders and the Pathfinder tool to create these shapes and add them to the text and just make this sort of melting, kind of interesting melting look. And then lastly, a blur effect to potentially use for, I don't know if this will actually preview, but to potentially use for your ideas. But feel free, explore, do some research on your own, check some of these things out. Find, obviously if you want to find tutorials, but think of different interesting words to use. Instagram is honestly a great resource for checking out designs, for inspirations, tutorials, etc., etc. But for this part of the final projects, feel free to explore and really kind of have fun with this. It sounds cheesy, but I'd like you to hopefully have some fun with this, and really explore, the more illustrative side of what we can do in Adobe Illustrator.